Hi, everyone. In this video, we are going to discuss question types. So before getting to talking about types of questions, I want to start by talking about a declarative sentence. So as a reminder, a declarative sentence is a sentence with a clear subject and predicate. So the sentence that I'm going to use throughout this video is I am bearing my teeth, which has a clear subject and a clear predicate. It's also a slightly, ever so slightly modified sentence from Sarah J. Maas's Court of Thorns and Roses. I promised you I would be using published sentences, so I'm trying to stick to that. So there are four main question types in the English language. So we're going to go through and we're going to talk about all of them in a little bit more detail. So the first type that we're going to talk about are yes/no questions. So yes/no questions are fairly straightforward. In order to ask a yes/no question, we invert the subject and the auxiliary verb. Okay. So let's take a look at our declarative sentence. We're going to do that. We're going to switch the subject, which is I, with the auxiliary verb, which is am. So that is going to result in am I bearing my teeth. Okay. Which makes it a question. So this is the auxiliary, that's the subject. So something as simple as switching them is going to create a yes/no question for us. So the answer to this sentence would be either yes or no. Similarly, another way you can do it if there's no auxiliary verb, okay, would be to add the word do, or we could also use did. So let's say there was no auxiliary verb. So let's say instead of I am bearing my teeth, we just had the declarative sentence, I bear my teeth. We could instead have do I bear my teeth, right? Or did I? So we insert the do and we have the subject, right? And so that once again creates a nice yes/no question for us. So one type of question is kind of the straightforward yes or no. The second type of question is the WH question. So there are a variety of different forms that this type of question can take. So we're going to talk about how to create those questions and what they look like with each of the various terms that might be used. So key thing with WH questions is that the WH word appears at the beginning of the question. Okay. And then it should also respond with a declarative statement to determine the function of the WH word. So I'm just going to write respond with declarative statement to determine function. And I will explain that more as we start digging into it. Okay, so let's start by taking a look at what. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with that initial sentence and say something along the lines of what did I bear at him? So I might respond to this sentence with the statement, I bared my teeth, right, at him. So that becomes a declarative statement. My teeth is the direct object in that sentence. So what has the function of the direct object here, right? I bared what at him? So this then becomes a like WH question because we're introducing that WH at the beginning. That idea that if we respond with a declarative sentence, that's going to help tell us the function of the WH word. So let's take a look at where. We might say, where did I bare my teeth at him, right? Why did I bare my teeth at him? When did I bare my teeth at him? How did I bare my teeth at him? So I'm going to pause there for a second because one of the things you're going to notice is that the where, why, when, how, these are functioning much more so like adverbs or adjectives, right? I bare my teeth at him. We have subject, verb, direct object, indirect object. So if I said something along the lines of I bare my teeth at him in the clearing, right? In the clearing is what I'm introducing for where. This is a prepositional phrase, and it's going to function, right, like an adverb, in this case, an adverbial adjunct, right? Because we can remove it. So it's providing additional information, right? Why did I bare my teeth at him? I'm going to provide additional information. So the function of each of these WH words changes based on the type of declarative answer that we might get. So that's what, right, the respond with a declarative sentence is all about. Now, who and whom are two relative pronouns is what they're called. But I want to discuss them a little bit before I give you examples of what those sentences look like. So who is the subject form of the pronoun, whereas whom is the object form of the pronoun. And we'll talk a little bit about this distinction and whether or not it's important. So for instance, I might say if I was using um, who bared their teeth at him, right? An answer to that question might be I bared my teeth. I'm not going to finish the rest of it. But you'll notice that I is the subject and that who is the subject, right? So that declarative statement is telling us that we need that pronoun who because it's taking the place of the subject, right? Now, it's a little bit different if we're talking about an object, and there are a couple of different forms that could take. So we might say, for instance, I bared my teeth at whom, right? So whom is the object because it's taking the place of the indirect object at him, right? So with that, we can call this a Pied Piper because what it's doing is it is keeping the preposition and whom together. Okay. And when you have what's called a Pied Piper, it just means that they're together. So I'm saying at whom, right? They're together. I could also move that to the beginning, right, of the sentence, and I could say, at whom did I bare my teeth? Now, there's something a little bit different that we can do with the object. We could also say, whom did I bare my teeth at? Um, Still, we have whom taking the place, because I would still say at him, right? So it's taking the place of the indirect object, so it's still an object. But this is called a stranded, which means that the whom is at a distance from the preposition, right? Which is at the end of the sentence. So when we're dealing with who, whom, this is the way it works. Who you use for the subject, whom you use for the object, it doesn't matter so much whether the preposition is next to the whom, as in Pied Piping, or stranded from the whom. Either is appropriate. What is significant when we're talking about who, whom questions is that insisting on whom can be pedantic, meaning, right, like it could just sound odd. It's rare that we say, like, at whom did I bare my teeth? We're more likely to say, like, who did you bare your teeth at, right? Not whom did you bare your teeth at. So this is one of those instances of which we might talk about grammatical correctness, but there's a difference between what we tend to do in speech versus what we consider to be correct, okay? Now, the next type of question are echo questions. And with echo questions, what you are doing is leaving the WH word in its original syntactic position. Okay. So I will give you an example, right? I might say I bared what at him, right? So instead of saying what did I bear at him, I'm keeping that what in the direct object position, and that's still creating a question, right? I might say I bared my teeth at him where, right? Again, a little clunky, but we would probably tag that answer onto the end, right? I bared my teeth at him in a clearing. It would be similar. I would say I bared my teeth at him. Why? Um, I would probably respond by saying, right, like I bared my teeth at him because, and then finish the sentence. Right. So it's still in that original syntactic position. I might say I bared my teeth at him when, right? I bared my teeth at him how. And you'll notice all of these are at the end because they provide additional info, right? So they're not actually filling one of the main functions in the sentence. They're not like subject, verb, direct, object, subject, complement. Now, that's a little bit different when we get to who versus whom, right? I might say who bared their teeth. Or I might say I bared my teeth at whom. If I was speaking it, I would probably say at who. But you'll notice once again, right, they're taking the place of that original word that they're substituting in for. So this then becomes an echo question because you're kind of echoing it as you continue instead of moving it and making it a WH question by putting that word at the beginning, right? So WH questions start with a WH word, whereas echo questions contain a WH word but may not start with it. Okay. The last type of question that we're going to talk about are tag questions. And there are a couple of important things to be aware of with tag questions. So tag questions are literally tagged on with a comma. Okay. And they repeat. Okay. The auxiliary verb and subject. But the subject is repeated as a pronoun. Okay. And so I will show you what I mean by that. So we're going to stick with our sentence. We're going to go back to I am baring my teeth. So I would say, right, I am baring my teeth, aren't I? Right. So I'm tagging it on with a comma. I have the pronoun, right? And then I'm using that auxiliary verb, which in this case is a form of the verb to be. And we'll talk a little bit about the whole aren't I thing in just a moment. But that's what you're doing with a tag question. You have your declarative statement, you follow it with a comma, and then you have the repetition of an auxiliary verb and a pronoun. So there are a couple of different forms that this can take. So tag questions can have what's called polarity, which means that they could either request kind of positive affirmation or negative affirmation. If we're requesting positive affirmation, we're going to use, oddly enough, a negative tag, right? And a negative tag will basically include a not. And I'm just going to do an example there, didn't they, right? So I, for instance, might say, I bared my teeth, comma, didn't I? And what I want you to say is yes. Yes, you did, right? I'm looking for that positive, that affirmation. So the negative tag allows for positive affirmation. Now, if you're looking for a negative response, oddly enough, you are going to have a positive tag, which would be something along the lines of, did they? Right? So here I might say, I bared my teeth. Did I? right? I bared my teeth, did I? We want somebody to say like, no, you didn't. That didn't happen. So we're looking for like a negative response instead of a positive one, but we use a positive tag for that. So it basically means there's no not in the tag. The last two kind of aspects of tag questions that I want you to be aware of and think about are the use of aren't I and there is versus there are. So aren't I is interesting. It's used because am I not sounds like stilted, right? Or weird. I could just say weird. It sounds weird. We talked about this a little bit before, but there's no actual contraction for am not. The closest contraction that we have is ain't because amn't is right, like not a word. Right? It's not a word. It doesn't work. So as you saw above, if I were to say I bear or I am bearing my teeth, right? Um, I would have to use aren't I to create that tag, even though I wouldn't say I are bearing, right, my teeth. So it's just important to be aware that we do use aren't I in this way, even though technically the pronoun I and the predicate are do not agree in number. Okay. Similarly, with there is or there are, usually when we're dealing with this, the verb usually agrees with the noun it refers to. Okay. And I'll show you what I mean in just a second. The interesting thing with there is or there are, we sometimes, especially in speech, will use theirs with an apostrophe S for plurals. Okay. Um, so for instance, we would say there is a ferry over there, right? Isn't there to create a tag question, right? Ferry in this instance is singular, right? So is singular and is over here is the singular conjugation of that verb. Now, interestingly, right, we would say there are fairies, and I am using the weird spelling of fairies that happens in the book, A Court of Thorns and Roses. It's just like a medieval spelling. There are fairies over there, aren't there? Right? So fairies is plural. So we have are, which agrees in person, right? Also plural. Now, what becomes quite interesting with these sentences is sometimes we'd say, there's fairies. Whoop, and of course, I'm misspelling fairies now that I've talked about it. There's fairies over there, isn't there? Okay. So technically, this is grammatically incorrect according to a prescriptivist because fairies is plural, but the ises are both singular, right? Now, It doesn't mean we don't say it. Sometimes we do. And when we're taking a descriptivist approach to grammar, we're explaining what grammar does. So because this sentence still communicates and we understand what's happening, we can point it out. So it doesn't mean for like testing, for instance, you wouldn't need to know the difference or know that are is the form of the verb to be that you use with a plural. But it is important to be aware that sometimes those sorts of distinctions can be complicated because this is the type of thing that we do when we're speaking. We just say there's fairies over there, isn't there? So just kind of be aware and think about that as you're considering different sorts of questions.